Hello, my name is Simon. Welcome to Why Is That, a free speech platform where we explore big ideas and the controversies of our time. Hello, beloveds, and welcome to another show of Why Is That, a show where we explore big ideas and the controversies of our time. Today on the show, we're having Karen Straughan, the world's most popular men's rights activist. Some people think that men are disadvantaged in today's society. Why is that? And, of course, as mentioned, we have Karen to talk about that. And also we're joined by Danny Duchamp.
Yeah, hello, I'm back again. I'm really happy to be on with you, Karen. I think that a lot of people have watched your videos, etc., but probably not the same people who are listening now. This is sort of a different kind of audience than I think that our sort of YouTube community tends to go out to. So first of all, who are you?
I'm guessing by all of that preamble, you're essentially saying, please be gentle with our audience. But who am I? I'm just a regular person. I don't have any special credentials. I'm a mother of 3. I've been divorced. I'm about to get married again at some point. We haven't picked a day, but we've agreed that that's what's going to happen. And I'm just I saw a deficit in society's attention toward issues that are faced by men and boys, and I kind of just started talking about it, and it snowballed. I just sort of became very popular online. People started listening to me. People started asking me to come out and speak at different events, and it just went from there. So I just sort of it's not really a career that I had ever envisioned for myself. It's just something that I fell into, and I seem to be good at. So just expressing the male perspective in a way that people find understandable and not threatening. So, yeah.
It's quite interesting how a lot of men feel they can't express a lot of their experiences to people.
Well, I think that's understandable. It's not just that they can't, that they don't feel like they can. They can't. Like there is this sort of thing in us as people where when men are angry, we're scared of them and we just want them to go away. But when they're sad or depressed or despondent or despairing or hopeful or in pain, we just assume that there's something wrong with them and we want them to go away. And it's kind of a catch-22 that no matter how a man expresses his emotions, unless he's perfectly content and perfectly not in need of any assistance whatsoever, we don't want to listen to him. So it really does fall to women, I think, at least in terms of getting the ideas out there and getting the information out there, at least in this initial stage, where we're expressing things that people maybe haven't even thought of before. It really falls to women to take the lead in at least sort of breaking the public in and sort of getting them to be willing to listen, convincing them to listen to these problems, right? Because it doesn't matter how men express it. If there's anything wrong, nobody wants to hear it. So.
But don't we live in a culture, Karen, that advantages men? Don't we live in a patriarchy?
Oh, that is such a load of crap. Oh, my God. Okay, yes, men have some advantages. Okay, but women also have many, many, many advantages, and one of their advantages is that when they complain, people listen. When they complain, people aren't scared of them. When they're angry, people aren't scared of them. They can march in the streets. They can yell and scream and shout. They can, bare their breasts in a slut walk and declare themselves the enemy of all men and all of this other stuff. And nobody's scared of that. People will be like, oh, well, either they'll be like, good on her, or they'll be, I don't really get that, but whatever. It's tolerated, right? But when men express anger, when men express these things, when they express their difficulties, when they talk about their problems, they're essentially just told to shut up. And I recall I was watching an episode of The Big Questions on BBC, and one of the feminist women on there said that essentially the problem is that from the time that they're small, boys and girls are raised to believe that they're different and they're treated differently, and boys are raised to not be emotionally intelligent, and they're raised to suppress their feelings, blah, 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 right? But she thinks that that's the problem. But we literally have two generations of men now who were raised with under a paradigm that essentially says we're all special, we all have feelings, we're all worthy, all of this stuff. It's okay to cry, it's okay to express your feelings. And yet suicide rates among adolescent young men are higher, not just higher in terms of compared to women of the same age, but higher in terms of what they were 20 years ago. And what seems to be the case, at least to me, is that we're raising generations of young boys to believe that their feelings matter and to express those feelings and to feel like by expressing them their needs and their problems will be dealt with. But the moment that these young men grow an Adam's apple and their voice cracks and they sprout a little peach fuzz on their face, then the male tears coffee mugs come out, and even the people who believe and profess that men should be allowed to express their feelings are drinking their male tears and telling them that they should sit down and shut up and check their privilege. So essentially we've given two generations of young men a bait and switch. We've told them your feelings matter the whole time they're growing up, and we have done nothing to prepare them for the world that they will enter when they become men and people stop caring, including the very people who were saying that everybody should care about their feelings. So
yeah, it is interesting that there seems to have been that push to get men to open up about their feelings on one level, but then not actually any kind of push to deal with their problems once they do.
Well, I think even the idea of men opening up about their feelings, I think certain types of women, feminist women, I think they genuinely believe that they want that. But I think that once they're actually confronted with a man who is vulnerable, with a man who is expressing his vulnerability and expressing his pain and the ways that he feels marginalized and all of that, they once they're actually confronted with that, I don't think that they have any ability to actually cope with it. So it's sort of like they're living in this kind of utopia that doesn't take into account their own natures as far as what they can tolerate in another human being. I mean, we all want to think that we're these beautiful, wonderful people who would totally accept, we would totally feel pity or mercy or kindness or compassion towards anybody who's expressing suffering, but that's not going to necessarily be the case. Just because we feel like we're these enlightened beings doesn't mean that we are. And so I think that really a lot of men have been led down a garden path of, go ahead and tell me how you feel. And then when those men do, then their wives are like, I want a divorce.
Yeah. So a lot of people, I'm sure, hearing these sorts of things be discussed will think that the solution is the feminist movement. You describe yourself as an anti-feminist, I've noticed. So why isn't feminism the movement to fix this problem?
Because feminism hasn't identified what the problem is. It's completely misdiagnosed the problem. I mean, feminism believes that culture is to blame. It thinks that if we smash the system, if we destroy and dismantle the system and reconstruct a new system, then people will behave differently, right? And people will probably behave differently, but not differently enough, right? There's not going to be some kind of system that you can create to replace the system that we have that will make women particularly interested in hearing about, in having sex with a guy who cries for 40 minutes afterwards or whatever, right? Like, they don't understand that the system is a human creation. The system itself is a human creation. We created the system. The system does not create us. And because of that, they think that if we just dismantle the system, then we can reshape humanity in some completely new way, when in reality, whatever system we have is a system that we have created, and part of what created it is a set of innate drives that inform our human psychology. And gender is one of the most important parts of our human psychology. It's one of the most fundamental ones. It's right up there with sleep and the desire for safety and shelter and food and all of those basic needs on Maslow's hierarchy. When it comes to our psychological drives to acquire those, well, there's a psychological drive in terms of gender, in terms of our reproductive strategies, in terms of our perception of other human beings, and there's really no way to eliminate that. I mean, at best, you can work around it. You can set up rules that minimize the most harmful effects of that and maximize and channel that into some kind of constructive thing that's good for society. But you can't eliminate it because it's going to be there within us. We could be living in a post-apocalyptic dystopia with no government, no system whatsoever, and we're still going to be human beings, and we're still going to have certain drives.
Karen, I noticed, because we hear a lot about the feminist narrative, and of course they're the compassionate ones, etc., but an associate of yours termed the phrase the empathy gap, where, women get a lot of empathy, but men get none. I mean, I was part of an organisation which had a woman head, and she would, an associate of mine, she would just go off and send these really, like 4-page abusive emails and things like that. And when we try to call her on it, it's like, oh, her behaviour was perfectly reasonable, and, you're being bullying by pointing it out.
Oh, yeah, no, that's actually really, really, really common with women, is that they will provoke an attack and provoke an attack and provoke an attack, and then when all you have to do is say you're being abusive, and then they're like, oh, you're bullying me by saying that. You're attacking me by calling me on my behavior, and that's actually a symptom. It's more common now than I think it probably was 100 years ago, simply because we've allowed it to become we've allowed the excuse. Women didn't used to be allowed to run roughshod over everybody, and and Bob and his uncle and like the entire universe, just whenever they felt like taking their day out on everyone around them. Women didn't used to actually be excused in that. I seem to recall there was a phrase, you never hit a lady, but not all women are ladies. Right?
Yeah, no, that's true.
That was something that my grandmother knew, and my grandfather knew, and the people of their generation knew, was you never hit a lady, but not all women are ladies. You had to earn your status as a lady. You had to actually behave courteously and politely and give other people respect and not be a raging harpy in order to have the status of a lady and get that extra protection, right? Because there's never been a you never hit a gentleman rule. Not even you never hit a gentleman. You never hit a man? No. Yeah, you can always hit a man. You can always hit even a gentleman you can hit, right? But ladies had a status, an elevated status that essentially inoculated them against certain forms of violence and even verbal vulgarity. But they had to actually live up to the role of lady. Now we just have this thing where if you have the requisite genitals, you can get away with whatever, and if anybody calls you on it, you can just accuse them of attacking you for no good reason. And that's absolutely, and it's not even that it's not okay in terms of socially being pro-social, in terms of how it serves society, in terms of how it affects men. It's not even good for those women who are enabled and allowed to treat other people that way. They're never happy, right? And being allowed to do that doesn't make them happy.
Because we do see the phenomena, it's like girls hitting a boy and go, you can't hit me back because I'm a girl.
Yeah.
Of course. And a girl who says, you can't hit me back because I'm a girl, at least she's being honest.
That is
right?
true.
At least she's saying, here's the reason. It's because I'm a girl.
Yeah.
Right? And there's no other reason other than that arbitrary thing that I'm a girl and you're a boy.
It is
right?
true.
At least she's being honest about it. Once they get to be adults, they make up all of these convoluted things. Well, I hit you. You can't hit me back because patriarchal norms reinforce male violence and dominance against women and subordinate us and blah, blah, blah. Right? And they have to create these huge, mountainous, convoluted explanations to justify why they can hit a man and he is not allowed to hit them back. Because if they admitted that it's because I'm a girl, then the entire equality myth that feminism hides behind would evaporate.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people who are listening who do have some kind of problem with feminism, which a lot of people seem to, polls don't put feminism as that popular of a word to identify with. A lot of people who wouldn't like feminism, who'd be listening, it would be because they tend to say those very vague, convoluted things in order to justify their positions. This patriarchal societal norm means that I get to do this thing, then you can't. It seems like just an overly convoluted and overly vague way of justifying some action. Now, I think that a lot of people would also look at the men's rights movement and worry that it might be similar. Why is the men's rights movement different? Are you not creating some excuse for men in the same way?
I don't think so. I don't think there have ever... Well, I guess maybe we're creating excuses for men in the sense that there have never been excuses for men. Men's roles have always been much more rigid than women's roles. You can even see that in the fact that female homosexuality and male homosexuality and how they're both viewed in Middle Eastern countries. There is no country in the world that only outlaws female homosexuality, but there are several that only outlaw male homosexuality. There are several that where male homosexuality demands the death penalty, where female homosexuality may not even be criminalized. If it is criminalized, it's punishable by prison or something like that. So, I mean, you sort of look at the entire shebang right from the get-go in terms of, all the way back to Sparta and beyond, and you look at the roles that were required of men, and you look at the fact that there were no excuses allowed for men. And there have always been allowances in the law for women. There have always been ways for women to hold their men accountable for their own actions. For a woman does something wrong, she can blame a man for that and hold him legally or criminally accountable for that. So essentially what you have is, I guess, maybe the men's rights movement, if it's making excuses for men, it's a brand new thing. It's really the revolutionary idea. Whereas with feminism making excuses for women, well, we've always made excuses for women. In 1920, there was a national conversation between op-eds in American newspapers, Boston Globe, New York Times, and the like. They were discussing whether they should just give women legal amnesty when they killed men, because it was impossible to convict one when you actually prosecuted her. And it didn't matter. They listed a case where a woman shot her ex-fiancé in the stomach when he terminated their engagement. And she shot him in the stomach and killed him, and she wasn't convicted, right? She was not convicted because, it hurt her feelings that he would terminate their engagement, and so it was perfectly understandable what she did. And I don't think you're ever going to find a point in history where anybody was batting around the idea of just allowing men to kill women, and the government would just say, well, I'm sure he had a good reason. We won't even investigate to see. We'll just drop it because there's no way he'll ever be convicted.
Yeah.
In fact, in cases in honor cultures where men kill women, often you end up with justice being served before the courts can actually get involved. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that there's a couple of really controversial points, or some things that'll be seen as controversial in what you said there. I think that most people would say, even if, sure, the pendulum swung too far in the West now, at least Saudi Arabia or some of these Islamic theocracies, at least those are patriarchies which oppress women, aren't they?
They are patriarchies, for sure. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they oppress women. They offer women and men each a different set of obligations and entitlements, and a different set of rights and responsibilities. So what you have is a situation where in Saudi Arabia, a university professor did a blog post on this. I could probably find it for you if I really tried. He did a blog post on it. He did a poll of the women in his class, and most of his students were women, because 60% of university students in Saudi Arabia are women. Most people probably would not think that, but that's essentially what,
I didn't know that till
what
just
it's
now.
like there. But he asked them if they wanted the driving ban lifted, and 80% of his students said no.
Huh.
They did not want the driving ban lifted, 80% of his female students. And the reasons they gave were, well, if we are not allowed to drive, then our men are obligated to chauffeur us around like queens.
Right.
And on top of that, if women are not allowed to drive, our husbands will not encounter other women in public as often, and they will have less opportunities to cheat. And of the 20% or so of the women in his class who said that they did want the driving ban lifted, they didn't want that to be like just an unconditional thing. They wanted women-only lanes and stuff like that, right? So, I mean, which would be completely unworkable as far as I'm concerned. So, we are looking at it through our Western lens, as far as what things are like for women in that part of the world. And we're also looking at it like, well, it's a patriarchy. Men are in charge. Therefore, men are all treated like kings, right? And the women are treated like dirt. When in reality, if if the man of the house, the father of the family, the husband and father, dies, and he has a 13-year-old son and 3 daughters and a wife that he leaves behind, his 13-year-old son does not become the head of the household, right? Because he's not old enough to direct, to make the decisions, to have the authority, but he becomes financially responsible for every member of that household. So, no school for you. You got to go out and work.
Yeah.
That's how it is, because you have 4 mouths to feed. You have a mother and 3 sisters.
And not in the ideal working conditions.
No, that's true.
95% of child laborers in Afghanistan are boys, and they're doing things like hauling bricks and sending the money home to feed their mother and their sisters. 95% of sex workers in Afghanistan are boys, and they're doing it for the exact same reason, or because their parents sold them into that job in order to be able to support the rest of the family with the money that they got. So you're looking at, and the reason that these are boys who are stuck doing this is because women are exempt from this. Women aren't allowed to work, right? But that means that they don't have to. And so the entire burden falls on the men and boys in their lives to do that. And when it comes to, working in some ship-breaking yard in Bangladesh, where, you're 15 years old, you're working in your bare feet with no helmet, no safety equipment, breaking apart decommissioned ships and hauling the metal for scrap. And that's the job that killed your father. And, and then the entire world wants to portray your 2 sisters and your mother who have to cook you some chickpeas with rice to have it on the table when you get home from that job, right? That they're oppressed because they can't go out and work. In Bangladesh, they have every right to work, but they also have every right to expect the men in their family to support them, including their 15-year-old brother, right? And so, and this is an Islamic tradition. This is an Islamic custom. So you have to look at both sides of the coin. You have to really look at the entire set of laws, the entire set of customs, and see how it treats both sexes. And I'm not a fan of Islam. I'm not a fan of these rigid roles. But you're never going to get rid of them until women under Islam decide that not only do they want to get rid of their responsibilities, burdens, and obligations under those customs, but they also want to get rid of their entitlements and their special rights, because they do have many special rights that men do not have under those systems. So essentially, you're going to have to convince women to give up their special status, not as second-class citizens, but as different citizens. And I don't know whether they're ready to do that yet.
Okay, Karen, we're just coming to the end of the first segment, and we encourage our listeners to listen again next week for the second half of the interview.
And you can also check out more Karen Straughan at Honey Badger Radio.
And KarenStraughan.com, and you can listen to, if you can't make it for next week, Why Is That on YouTube. Join me, Simon and guests, 104.6 FM at 3:15 on Tuesdays for my show, Why Is That? Or anytime online at planetaudio.com.